why I connected this essay to the previous one. Previous means that you have already got the concept in our +2 in Heritage of Words. There is the story. So the same Marxist point of view, Karl Marx, the same philosophy, this class struggle, class conflict, and the conflict between proletariat and bourgeois, or powerful and powerless, or oppressors and oppressed. The same conflict we can interpret this story from this perspective. And here some more explanation is all made, which was depicted in the Communist Manifesto. So let's discuss further, and if you have some questions during the classes or after the classes, please do raise your questions. So not only listen and leave the classes. I will take attendance later. So shall I share a screen if it is visible? Let me know.
Yes.
First of all, we'll briefly discuss about the biography of Karl Marx, how it was written, who wrote this, why it was written, what was their main argument. First of all, we have to find out the thesis statement in the essay. What is the thesis statement and what is that, let's say, the argument of the essay, one thing. Then who wrote this, why it was written, and in what context, what does it say, or what are the main principles of this essay, and further, what changes has it brought in the world history. We'll talk about all different sorts of things. So let me share the screen. And before that, let me again show you this. Again, at least we will be clear about it further within 2 minutes. Okay, is the screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, so here you go. You can see Manifesto of the Communist Party. Later on, it became Communist Party with its, let's say, improvement, some modification. The beginning line is this: the spectre is hunting Europe. This spectre is hunting Europe. That the spectre of communism. So this communism has all spreaded there in the Europe. Communism, okay, communist philosophy. This is all over the Europe, especially in Germany, England, France, and other countries in the Europe. All the powerful and old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exercise this spectre. Pope and Tsar, actually this is somewhere written Tsar as well. Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies, and so on. So where is the party opposition that has not been decried as communistic in its opponents? So he raises this question first, and this talks about the communism, then two principles. I won't talk much about this. You can see. What is the end of that one? So what two beliefs, two systems, two principles he talks about here. Further, bourgeois and proletariats, the chapter 1. This is chapter 1. Under he discusses the differences between bourgeois and proletarians. And this is then he talks about the remarkable remarkable expression that Karl Marx makes here is the history of all hitherto existing societies, the history of class struggle. And this is we have to consider as the main element here. So he talks about, so far we have the history, even in ancient period, even in medieval period, or even in modern period, there is always the class struggle. The class struggle is between two classes. Those two classes are the bourgeoisie and proletarians. So these proletarians are the working class, and bourgeoisies are the ruling class. They are in rules, they are in authority, and they are powerful, they are oppressors. But on the other hand, proletarians are working class, they are poor, they are just oppressors, and they do not have much right as well. They are just like slaves are actually, there is still difference between slave and proletarians, but they are the another class of the society, and always there is the struggle between these two, because they use their they sometimes use and sometimes they misuse as well. They confine themselves, and then they raise the voice for their freedom, their improvement, and because of this there is always the conflict, or there is always the class struggle. And this is between freeman and slave, or patrician and plebeian. Plebeian means very layman like us, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman. And whether in all these stratas of the society, between these classes there is always the struggle. In medieval period, or in feudal lords, or in early or in even in modern times, there is class struggle. So he talks in the very first chapter. Then he goes on in explaining these economic aspects, those capitalistic nature, and how do they behave, and what is the nature of division of labor, and how is capital developed, what is the aspect of industrial revolution that took place in England, then further let's say further improvement in the lives of the people, and how could they utilize their lives, their let's say fulfill their demands from this the development of industries, and what was the condition of proletariats. So proletariats, as he say, increased in number. They had to work more for more hours. Machines replaced proletariats, and proletariats conditions even became worse, even during that industrial revolution or industrial era in England. But later on, they got together, and they formed trade unions. They raised their voice from their for this discrimination, their pathetic livelihoods, and they worked together, and they raised the voice, and they were able to let's say success in that right way. That right way was, there were so many revolutions that took place. Either it was Renaissance, it was let's say industrial revolution, it was French revolution, or like sorts of things have happened, have taken place in the history. And these all struggles have been because of the two classes, or the struggle between these two classes. Next, he discusses further about the formation of society, the formation of capitalism, or the formation of this economy, let's say, and how that is formed. So he talks about some essential conditions as well that exist in the society between these two classes. And there is argumentation of capital. There is the condition of capital, and for the proletarians, it is all wage-based labor, or wage labor-based wage-based gain they get, and this exclusively is the ownership in the hand of bourgeois. So the advancement of industries, with its let's say replacement of machines, and all this is the ownership from the bourgeois, and they produce, and just proletariats are involved in their survival only. So they are not equally treated. And ultimately he comes to one very major statement here. As you can see, the bourgeois therefore are producers. They produce and they are the producers, but they are their own grave diggers as well. They are their own grave diggers, means they are there to have their own end of that system. And its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. So ultimately, bourgeois try to suppress, or let's say rule over the proletariats, and the proletariats are together later to raise their freedom, to work for their rights, and then they ultimately get involved in that any revolution, they win ultimately. This is what he believes in the first chapter. We have the second chapter, Proletarians and Communists. Here he talks about the differences between even two groups, and Communists and Proletarians are even different. There are differences. The key difference is that here the working class parties are the proletarians, but the Communists are in the belief system that they do not wish for, or they do not have the interest for this this property regarding the privatization, or no private property here in for the Communists. But proletarians are slightly, they work for others, or they work in the industries, they work for the bourgeois and so on. So in different countries it may be the nature may be different, but mainly this is the case. The Communists are practically the most advanced, he says, resolute section of working class parties of every country, and in Russia, in China, or in most of the world, they have the understanding of the conditions of society, and ultimately the results for the they work out to join these proletarians. They work to gather together, and finally this results in the proletarians movement. So for this, Communists are responsible. They just make them together. This is how it differentiates. And further difference is that proletarians don't have the concept of private property, but Communists believe that there should be no any private property as such. This is the communism or Communists. So the distinguishing feature, as you can see, of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. And communism just was there just to talk about there should be no any such property. They should not have that right all to get that excessive or too much property by the bourgeois. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system. And in this theory, we can find Communists may be summed as this in a single sentence. So how they are different is this is the striking line. This is the major line. Abolition of private property. This is what Communists believe. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. You can just summarize this whole. There was the feudal system as well. Then later on, the system was changed, and there got bourgeois and proletariat. Again, Communists, and these Communists, they believe that, or in their single instance, they are different from working class or that proletariats in one sentence. That is, they just support or the view there should not be any private property, or bourgeois should not have that property as they have hoarded that much. So they just abolish, or the abolition of private property is there. And this is how they are different than other working classes. He talks further about that what that private property is, what do you mean by private property, and so on. So he answers this and explains further. We'll generalize this later, go through this further if you have not. Then in the third one, further he talks about some guiding principles as well regarding these Communists and proletariats. So he charges against government system as well, what government system really is this. But in this chapter, in chapter 2, you can see these pretty following generally applicable principles, and we'll talk about these 10 general goals of let's say communists, or goals of Communist Manifesto. So by Marx and Engels, they believe that abolition of property in land, or application of all rents of land or land to public purposes, they are in favor of that. Then heavy progressive or graduated income tax, they believe in this. If graduated income tax or heavy progressive tax as they are just the public have to pay, then of course they are not in favor of keeping those all properties and so on. So this may be equality or somehow similarity in reduction of the classes as well. Abolition of all rights of inheritance, like my father had this much property and I should have all this. That must be abolished, what they believe. And their philosophy was this, their principle was this. So there must be abolition of all that rights of inheritance, confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels. So these are 10 principles, and they have the guiding, they are the goals. Their theory, this Communist Manifesto or this Marxism, is oriented to this one. And last one is, we'll discuss them detail later. Free education for all children in public schools. And working class group or proletariats, they just regard themselves to get this as the basic right. Free education should be there in all public schools, government school, and mainly schools should be regulated and controlled by the state. So abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, then that means in the industrial form, and combination of education with industrial production, that should be abolished. Rather, there should be free and compulsory education, free education for all children. This is what they believed, and mainly in bourgeois societies, thus they described about the differences that reside, that is between proletariat and the communists. So in some terms, he has described this in detail. In the third chapter, Marx and Engels, they have noted down some on socialist and communist literature. They talk about this socialist and communist literature differences and reactionary socialism. What they call this socialism as reactionary socialism, that is improved form of the communist as well. So there are some weaknesses, some forms of weaknesses in communist system, and later on they just talked about this literature as well. For this reactionary socialism, they have highlighted to talk about feudal socialism. Earlier there, that was in the ancient time. So in France, in Greek, in other parts of the world, so they have discussed about this condition, aristocracy, feudalism or feudal system, and later on it was in other parts like England as well. So he has talked about this. Next, he talks about Petty-Bourgeois Socialism, and third one, German or true socialism, because Marx was born and brought in German. Later on, he went to Paris, France, and later on Belgium, and finally he just settled himself in London. So he talked about the conditions of the Europe, other parts of the Europe, like Catholic and other literature, Catholic part, and their system there during the medieval and that time. For the conservative and bourgeoisie socialism, so these are the types of socialism: critical utopian socialism and communism. It talks about different forms of this literature, how were they practiced, and what was their existence during the period. So further, and finally, he talks about positivism of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. What is the position of communist? There are other forms, other existing parties as well. There are existing opposition parties as well. So what may be the position of those communists in the society or in the governance or in the system? He talks about this further in chapter 4, but this is a short chapter. He talks about final statement is here important. So still there is conflict, still there is that class struggle, but the communists, they disdain, conceal their views and aims. So they are open to declare their ends, their ultimate goals, that can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. So there you can see feudals and other systems or other ruling systems, but from the part of proletarians, there must be forcible overthrow. They must work out for overthrowing this system, and then only if they work out, if they just raise their voice for these existing social conditions, their condition could be improved. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any improvement on the part of proletarians. That's why he finally gives this Marx and Engels. They give the proletarians one awareness raising condition here. Let the ruling classes tremble in a communistic revolution. So communistic revolution means just keeping the eyes or believing on the principles of communistic philosophy. Let's rule together. Let's unite together. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Proletarians have the world to win. Ultimately, they win. So for this winning and for this their better condition, they have to be together. That's why final slogan of this catchy sentence, just a motivating sentence for the proletarians is working men of all countries unite together, unite for our sake, unite for our freedom, unite for our improvement, and proletarians must be united. This is what is last catchy sentence in the 4th chapter under Communist Manifesto. From the first sentence to last sentence, this is all about the generalization. There are, you can see still some answer question section, like how that can be achieved, and this is you have to consult. That's why I uploaded this text there in the Google, this LMS. Please go through it, and let me share another screen. What can you see on the screen?
Communist Manifesto, on page also.
Okay, thank you. So we have been 25 years. So let me share and hope everyone is listening. And before that, let me just take one short second. Just poll. Let's see. How many of you are there? Can you raise your hand? Okay, thank you. This is only for classroom purpose, and at least the whole essay, the crux, the theme could be explained and understood. We have discussed this. It is important. Why? I'm not going to read all this or discuss this all. I'll just upload this there in the LMS, so you can go through this. You can go through the essay, and you can go through other materials as well. And Karl Marx, if we call his full name is Karl Heinrich Marx, but generally popularly known as Karl Marx. This middle name is Heinrich, born on 5th in 1818 in the city of Trier, Germany. And he was born in comfortable middle-class Jewish family. And that time also there was discrimination that Prussian Jews they went through at the time. So this Jewish family, they were discriminated in the society there in Germany, that was from the feudals. And Karl Marx later on his father, let's say, he was a father, a lawyer, and he was the ardent supporter or the helper and just a believer of Enlightenment that was in Europe, especially in England, and later on liberalism. And later he converted that Lutheranism, that Luther from France as well. These were the leaders, and his father was just influenced by them. And Karl Marx got this broad secular education, and he was mainly influenced by Friar Ludwig von Westphalen. He was one of the Prussian noblemen, and his philosophy just Karl Marx enjoyed in his schooling or in his education. So this philosopher, simply known as Ludwig von Westphalen, uh, taught young Marx, and Marx just kept ideas of the early French socialist then, what was going on in France, and he was influenced by early French socialist Saint Simon. So as a student in Berlin, born in Berlin, he was taught there, and Marx was greatly influenced by Hegelic philosophy, and those who followed Hegel's, that they were simply known as young Hegelians, and one of young Hegelian was Karl Marx. So there was the group, and this group, they were the young icon clusters, and they involved in the philosophy what Hegel taught them, or what was Hegelian philosophy. And out among them, David Stratus, Bruno Bauer, and Max Stirner, Karl Marx, and others, they were inspired by Hegel, and but they were somehow different in in the perspective, in the philosophy of Hegel as well, because they were radical. They chose the radical path, and they just worked for societal improvement, and also there's kind of the discrimination that existed from the very earlier, and they just took this initiation and they tried to practice it, practical aspect, this. And next one is Karl Marx later on desired as a career as an academician in the beginning, because he was taught by great philosophers, influenced by them. In Berlin was then the center of excellence, and still it is though. But his desire was to be an academician, but because of the the controlled system of the government of the German government, then he changed his mind, and then he started, because that system was controlled by the university system, was controlled by the government, and this was a kind of discrimination he felt, and for this just he changed his mind and worked as the journalism, as a journalist. So he had radical politics attraction as well, and because of Prussian censorship, that they controlled the universities, they controlled the education, and they controlled the rights of the common people, let's say. And for this, just he raised this philosophy, this belief system in his mind, and he went to be radical politics, or just he wrote something for the consciousness raising in the society. And then he wrote the publication for and then this publication was later on, it was shut down, because he was radical. He just raised some voice for the against the ruling class then, those whoever have this censorship. And then after some while, he became frustrated, and Karl Marx went to travel to Paris, or from Germany to Paris. So he studied in Berlin. He was one of the disciple of Hegel. He was influenced by Hegel, and he desired to be academician at the first at the time, but later on he changed his mind in journalism, and he went to that against that Prussian censorship, and he worked for the publication, but that publication was shut down, and later on he frustrated and went to Paris. But in Paris, what happened? In 1843, there was one international center established that worked on social, that worked on political, artistic activities, and the intellectual people of his circle, they gathered there, and this was the place of radicals and revolutionaries from all over Europe. Ekikrit, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So they gathered together and they worked to raise what the system that was not functioning properly there in Europe. So because of this initiation, he took part in that radical movement as well. Further, in Paris, Marx became involved in with the socialist and revolutionaries. So he met Friedrich Engels there. This is most significant meeting with Friedrich Engels. Marx met him in Paris, and these two, they talked together. And Friedrich Engels was one of the wealthy person from the son of wealthy textile manufacturer in England. He went to Paris because German and Paris were even more academic institutions were there, and the leaders, these were the intellectuals, and they went there. And as in course of their meeting, they become a socialist after observing the deplorable condition. Friedrich Engels had his father's own factory there, and he observed the condition of that deplorable situation, the quite pathetic situation of workers there in the factory. And later on, he fed up with this situation of the workers, and he talked with Karl Marx, and then Friedrich Engels and Marx. Thus, they talked and they discussed on socialist or socialism or communism. Then, together, Marx and Engels began to develop the ideas which became revolutionary proletarian socialism. Then, and simply it was known as communism. Revolutionary proletarian socialism means communism. So against feudalism, against that bourgeoisie system, they just established their belief on the communism. Marx was exiled for this. In France, he was exiled in 1845, and he just raised the voice against the Prussian government, and he raised the voice, or his voice was anti-royalist writings. He wrote against the royalist, against the kings, against the palace, and he was exiled for the same in 1845 in France. After leaving Paris, then sometimes later he was released, and this Marx traveled to Belgium. So again in Belgium as well, he just took part in the artisans calling themselves a Communist League. They formatted Communist League in Belgium, and in 1847, this Communist League commissioned Marx and Engels to pen a statement of their beliefs and aims. So what are their beliefs and aims on communism? Just they were asked to write on it, paint on it. So this Communist League that was established in Belgium, and they just handed this responsibility to Karl Marx and Engels to write on it, their belief system on communism. So this communist later on, what they wrote, this became Communist Manifesto, which Marx zealously composed in anticipation of the revolution of 1848. When the revolution did begin in Germany in 1848, in the same year, they wrote this Communist Manifesto. It has influence throughout the Europe, and in Germany, in 1848, there was the revolution that took place. During the same revolution, just Marx traveled to Rhineland there in Germany. Just he encourages the people to take part in the revolution, and later on revolution failed, and as the revolution failed, Marx returned again to Paris, but soon he left for London, and he would take rest of his life there. He would remain rest of the life in London later. So this was the earlier journey of Marx. Later, after he got into London, Marx realized that revolution was important. Revolution was not imminent. It is all compulsory. So it is compulsory to withdraw the system, withdraw from his associations, just burying himself in the British Museum to research and history of class conflict. He saw the same system in London, in England as well. That's the system earlier was in France, in Germany. So throughout this system, there was still, and just he could not just remain silent for this. He wrote one of the masterpiece, Das Kapital, his book, and this volume first that was published in 1867. Later, Karl Marx successfully insinuated himself into leadership of the group. He was known as the group leader in that group as well. Later on, international, he delivered famous inaugural speeches, and one of the inaugural speech addressed to the First International as the triumphant proclamation of his principles based on what are his real principles. He just addressed to the mass, and he became famous in that way. Karl Marx had what he had desired since 1847 before writing the Communist Manifesto. He had provided this intellectual freedom for intellectual foundation for socialist movement, over which he exercised full of organizational control. So organizational control, he organized in group. He just gathered the people, working class, proletariats, and he taught them, raised awareness them, and so on. Then his satisfaction soon ended, because the Paris Commune of 1871, first true instance of workers achieving power for themselves, bloody disaster took place there. So there are some more disastrous events or struggles throughout the Europe, but Marx just helped Marx later on helped to other people just to take the initiation. Later he did not involve himself in that leadership, but his sole contribution to other people like Burkinian and other initiators, that he helped in throughout Europe. And later, finally, in 1883, Marx died in London, but still his desired, his predicted or his expected revolution is still awaiting to come throughout the Europe, because he expected for something idealistic society, or idealistic in the sense that there is no more conflict, no more class struggle, or no more that discrimination between the groups or the classes, but still this can be seen in the society. What can you see on the screen here?
About Communist Manifesto.
Okay, this is now we let's be orient towards the Communist Manifesto, what it really talks about. As he wrote this in 1846, Karl Marx was exiled from Paris on account of his radical politics. He was involved in radical politics. He raised the voice against, or he wrote against royal people, royal family there. But for the same reason, he was exiled in 1846. That was turning point for his life. He became more energetic, more involved, more active in the field. Then he moved, after he was released from there, he moved to Belgium, we have discussed, and he tried to assemble himself in Reactionary. This is one of the group, Reactionary group of exiled German. They were artisans, they were intellectual peoples, and they unified together. They established political organization. This was German Working Men's Association in Belgium. From German to those people who had been suffocated there in Germany, they just left for Belgium and they gathered together. They established this association. Marx was aware of this presence of similar organizations in England earlier, and he called this group together a meeting in the winter of 1847. He called the meeting and they gathered together. They discussed on the conditions then. Under Marx's influence of this assemblies of working class parties, he just gave name, or they gave the name, the Communist League. So the same Communist League, those who were mostly the German working means there, they gave the Communist League, and they discussed on the grievances, very difficulties with capitalism, what was the situation of industrialization, capitalism, Pujipati Vargale. कस्तो किसिमको दशा नागेको थियो त्यति बेला, कस्तो किसिमको दशा निम्त्याएको थियो त्यो वर्किङ क्लास पिपलका लागि, त्यसको बारेमा छलफल गरे। सो दिस क्यापिटलिजम and potential methods of response. What can be the potential method? How can we overcome this? Just they discussed on it. But most delegates of the conference, they advocated universal brotherhood, मिलेर जाउँ भने धेरै जसोले, as a solution to their economic problems. These are our economic problems, so let's advocate as universal brotherhood. But Karl Marx preached. He taught other people just it is not. He explained to the mass, mesmerized workers, that revolution was compulsory. Revolution was not the only sole answer to their difficulties, but revolution was indeed inevitable. This is inevitable. This is not only the solution. So that's why there is only revolution. Only revolution. Marx in favored revolution. So this league, that the Communist League, they handed or they commissioned as well. They commissioned means they provided them the money. Both Engels and Marx पैसा दिएर कम्युनिस्ट मेनिफेस्टो लेखाए त्यसपछि. The league, completely taken with Marx, commissioned him to write a statement of their collective principles. What are your views? What are your beliefs? What are your theories? Then write on it. Means they provided time, they provided them the money, and they wrote this. And this same statement is known as, or later it became Communist Manifesto. यसरी Communist League ले कार्ल मार्क्स र एंगल्सलाई लेखाउन दिएको त्यो स्टेटमेन्टहरुको कलेक्टिभ फर्म हो कम्युनिस्ट मेनिफेस्टो. के हुनुपर्छ, यो क्यापिटलिजमलाई कसरी एबोलिश गर्न सकिन्छ, that was their intention, and for the same they started writing on it. What time is it?
7:52.
Okay. Still there is, if we discuss this for 10 days, again it will be more, but we have to cut down that that long history or story. After the conference, Marx returned to Brussels again. He had this declaration in his hand. So these two delegates, Marx and Engels, they worked on it after the Communist League, and they just penned that general and common statements of the principles. And mainly there is even much role by Marx. He wrote furiously because they were given certain time. And after they wrote this, Communist League had said for them, or said for him, said for them means both of the delegates, Engels and Marx. This manifesto was published in February 1848, and it quickly published, and it helped the revolution that was going on in the continent. In the same year, there was the revolution in Germany, and this Communist Manifesto even helped the revolution in Germany as well. So when revolution broke out in Germany in March 1848, Marx traveled there. Again, he took part there. He just put his theory into practice. Means he had put that theory in manifesto. Later on, he involved in the revolution there. But revolution was suppressed by the government, and Marx fled to London. Then he established Communist League. That Communist League was disbanded because he was involved in Communist League as well. So manifesto, the manifesto, it's a only legacy to the world for a certain time, and this is the legacy. And many got benefited, influenced, and from the manifesto as well. In its 150 years of history, that was written in 1848, but now it has the most intellectual and political history that the manifesto has depicted. So it has been profound throughout the history. It has inspired the communist political system, this manifesto has, and which ruled nearly half of the world's population at its height in those days in communist era, but still there are in many countries you can see. And this defined the chief ideological conflict of the second half of the 20th century, century back. So this altered those countries which stood firmly against communism. They changed their beliefs, especially Western Europe. American welfare states and so on. Now they have established communism later. Intellectually, Marx's works were profoundly influenced nearly every field of study, not only in politics, not only in society. He has his field of study that has influenced in other fields as well, of humanities and social sciences, education, people's lives, natural sciences as well. So it is hard to imagine an era of serious human inquiry which Marxism has not touched. So his theory has influence in other fields as well, not only in politics. The manifesto is undoubtedly unique because it was during time it was written in only 23 pages of its first printing. Later on, it was revised and worked on it. So it just talked about the real existence of the system, but Marx never was departed from his original principles. Marx's most enduring literary legacy that set the movement, and it has exactly the same prediction that Marx has predicted. This has radically changed the world. Yes, in its essence, we can say because of the manifesto, it has radically changed the world. It has radically changed the belief system of so many communist countries, the people, and the systems as well. So, as Marx famously asserted in his theses of Friedrich, the philosophers have interpreted the world in many ways. Plato has interpreted in different ways. Hegel has differently interpreted. Marx differently. But he says what matters is changing it. So this is changeable. No one has epitomized this much as he has made. The world is changeable. There is still one or the another sorts of conflict is there because of the class conflict, class division. So Marx has concluded this in his final one. So we have already discussed about this bourgeois, capitalism, communism, and socialism, proletariat as well. So this is some important tips are there. You can enjoy and read them. Very interesting, and they have just been guidelines for the Communist Manifesto as well in the theory or in its essence. Like he says, a spectre is hunting Europe, the spectre of communism in his that Communist Manifesto. Similarly, another important one is the history of all hitherto existing societies, the history of class struggles in ancient, in medieval, or in modern times. Always there is the class conflict. So some like other quotations like, let's the ruling classes tremble as a communistic revolution. So this is important. This energizes other, last one energizes others just to be united together. The proletarians have nothing to lose, but they have to work together. Working mean of all countries, let's unite together, and then there will be evolution of that autocracy, evolution of bourgeoisie capitalism, and then there will be the equality for the working class. So these are his guiding principles and really important. Almost the time is over, and we should perhaps, I think we should take one more class on it. If you have any questions, we'll have discussion on 2 minutes. You can read out these. These are just simply final statement, class division and the conflict. Okay, let's take one more class because these two essays we have to invest 3 days per essay, and lectures will just complete within 1-2 days or 1 or 2 lectures. If you have any questions. Okay, tomorrow then we'll have some discussion on these 4 chapters. Overall, I have described the essence, what was the belief system, what was the principle, or what was the guiding principle of Communist Manifesto or communism, let's say, and what does he talk in these 4 different topics. Let's take one more final class. on this. And I will just uploaded this there in the LMS as well. Please do read out before listening. It would be better for you. Okay. So I stopped the sharing here. This much for today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.